We have a very special guest today as we welcome Greg Prato, the author of a new book on the New York Islanders called Hapless Islanders, which is the story behind the team's first year in the NHL. We also have a full preview of tonight's game in Vancouver and a lot more coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
You're Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Thursday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Without further ado, I want to get right into our interview, so we will welcome in Greg Prato. It is now my pleasure to welcome to the show the author of a great new book called Hapless Islanders, Greg Prato. And Greg, this is not your first book about the Islanders, but this one is certainly different. And the first question I have to ask, most people, the first book you wrote about the Islanders was about the dynasty years. And, it's typical that, authors will be interested in writing a book about a team that won 4 straight championships or even 1 championship. Mm-hmm. This book you chose to write about a team that at the time had the worst record in NHL history. What inspired you to choose this topic?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First, I want to say hello, Gil. How you doing?
Hi, Greg. Pleasure to have you here.
Yes, I want to say I really enjoy watching your podcast because as a longtime Islander fan, sometimes I feel like here living on Long Island, the Ranger fans outnumber the bloody Islander fans at this point. So
hard to believe. Wouldn't have been that way in the 80s, that's for sure.
No, I mean, I don't know if you want to talk about this quickly before we get into the books. I remember I was in elementary school and the Islanders were winning Stanley Cups, and you could not find a single Ranger fan in all of my school.
I think my middle school or junior high school, as we called it at the time, had like 3.
Right.
So, yeah. And I remember, if you wanted to go see the Islanders play Winnipeg on a Tuesday night, you had to know someone with season tickets or you had to pay a scalper because you couldn't get near, the old barn. So, yeah, very, very different set of circumstances back then.
I have a theory that I hope in my lifetime that I see the Islanders finally win the 5th Stanley Cup. And my theory is if they do that, suddenly you're going to see the pendulum swing back to there being a lot more Islander fans on Long Island. But that's just the Greg Prato theory. Who knows if that's true or not.
I like the theory, and I think there's validity to it.
Yes.
And I hope that we will be able to prove it someday.
Hopefully. All right, so now we got that out of the way.
Yes.
Yeah, so this book here, Hapless Islanders. Sorry about that. I just dropped something. When I worked on this book here, Dynasty, which came out about 10 years ago or so, that book, I interviewed Billy Harris for that book, who most Islander fans will know is the Islanders' first ever number 1 pick. And during the interview, he actually says it in the book that he always felt like he could write his own book just about that first year because it was just good story after good story about everything that went wrong, both on the ice, off the ice, behind the scenes, everything. So I kind of always remembered that, but I kind of put it towards the back because I primarily write a lot of like rock music books. That's what I pretty much do. But I also love my sports teams. I'm a big Mets, Jets, and Islanders fan, which is a very painful trio of teams to root for. But back in the early 80s, it wasn't that painful. Actually, for the Mets a little bit later, but at least I got to see the World Series in 1986. But anyway, so I stored what exactly Billy Harris told me, and about a year ago, excuse me, not a year ago, maybe like about 6 months ago, I got an email out of the blue by none other than Stan Fischler, who I interviewed for the Dynasty book, but I must not have sent him a copy. I tried sending copies to everyone that I could, and he emailed me out of the blue saying, "Hey, I saw your email in the book, and I just happened to discover this book now through a friend." And I think this is a fantastic book. He really praised it. He thought it was one of the best Islanders books. And I was absolutely blown away because in my view. Stan Fischler is, I think, the greatest hockey historian ever. So I mean, it's just mind blowing how much he still knows. He's in his 90s. When I interviewed him for this book, he was telling me things. He was as sharp as very, very sharp still.
Yep.
Yeah, very, very good. So anyway, I asked him. I said, Stan, I have always kind of toyed with the idea of doing a book about the first year of the Islanders. Do you think that's a good idea? Because similar to what you and I were talking about before we started the chat. Is that even like a worthwhile topic? Is everyone going to even want to read about that? And his reply was, no, you absolutely have to do it. That's a great idea. So he was the first on board. I did several interviews with him, which proved a little tricky because he's currently based in Israel. So the time zone difference is different from where I am based on Long Island, but we were able to make it work. I got to say, Stan is such a sweet, nice guy. He goes totally out of his way. Have nothing but very, very great things to say about Stan. So I was able to interview him. I interviewed Terry Crisp, who was a member of the Islanders' first year. Lauren Henning, who was also a member of that year. I also interviewed Jimmy Devellano, who was such an important part of the dynasty era that he is definitely an unsung hero. He should have his own special night. He should have his own banner where the Islanders play. He's responsible for drafting the majority of all the great Islander players in the 70s.
And he's a great interview also. I've spoken to him a few times. He's colorful. He's very colorful.
Very, 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 very much so. So yeah, I was able to interview them and also several other people. And I had I was able to get a lot of, I had a whole database of old Newsday articles so I can go back and kind of check my facts and things like that. So and then I also interviewed a gentleman named Harry Claff, who used to, I believe he was the scorekeeper at Nassau Coliseum in the 70s. And he had some great photos that he was able to that he let me use, which was very nice of him. So I have some interesting classic photos that I never saw before that are in the book. So yeah, so pretty much the reason to make the long story short, the reason why I did this book is because of the Islanders' bad first season. They were able to build on that. It was almost a building block for the later dynasty years because through that first year they got the first. They had two number one picks back to back. First Billy Harris. Then the big one was, of course, Dennis Potvin, which was the second one. And they built their whole team around him. Also, they brought in Al Arbour after that first horrible season. And through people like Jimmy Devellano, Bill Torrey, they were able to get great draft pick after great draft pick. And so through that first year that we talk about in Hapless Islanders, we then got Dynasty.
The amazing thing that I think a lot of contemporary Islander fans are not aware of is how important the WHA was toward the formation of the New York Islanders.
Yes, that's something else we talk about in this book, that without the WHA, which was the World Hockey Association, that was a upstart league that was trying to be in competition with the National Hockey League, similar to the USFL with also the NFL back in the 80s. And like the USFL, the WHA floundered, but there was a year or two where they were pretty much poaching all of the draft picks, and a lot of also big name stars from the National Hockey League went over there, such as Bobby Hull, Gordie Howe went over there. So what was happening was the WHA was threatening to open up to found their own Long Island-based hockey team. And when the National Hockey League found out about that, they didn't want that to happen, so they quickly swooped in. And they got the wheels rolling. And it's insane to think about how quick from the announcement. It was announced in late 1971 there was going to be a team on Long Island. Bill Torrey was hired in early 1972. So you didn't even have any players. The Nassau Coliseum was not even opened yet. It didn't open until I think the spring or summer. And they didn't even have the logo yet. So they did everything within less than a year, which is absolutely insane, especially when you compare it to some of the teams that come along now in hockey, that it takes a few years to build up and they take their time to make sure everything is in place. And that's also why the Islanders were so bad the first year, because so many of their top draft picks got stolen from WHA teams. So that's what happened with the first year with the Islanders and why they were so bad.
Yeah, they lost a lot of guys from the expansion draft, about 6 or 7 players, if I'm not mistaken, signed with the WHA instead of signing with the Islanders. And ironically, that helped them be as bad as they were that first year, and that's how they got Dennis Potvin.
Yes, there's a famous saying that you have to lose to know how to win, and I think the Islanders are the ultimate example of that. The Islanders and also the Mets, I talk about in this book, I saw a correlation between the Mets and the Islanders like early on and how they were able to quickly turn it around and become world champions after being so awful their first year. So that's what I talk about in the book too. I mean, besides the fact the Mets and Islanders have the same team colors, which are a reflection of, I believe, Nassau County, right? Isn't it the blue and orange or the Nassau County colors?
Yeah, they are the Nassau County colors. Yep. And and the amazing thing is so many people now, they think about the Nassau Coliseum, the old barn. Well, back then it was the new barn.
Yep.
And it was so new, they didn't even have a scoreboard ready for the first game that they played there.
Correct. They had to bring it in from a practice rink. Yep, very true. And yeah, the gentleman, Harry Claff, who I just mentioned, I think he was the one that was pretty much working that scoreboard. And it wasn't until I think the third year that they got the one that everyone knows, which is, hanging in the middle of the arena. But speaking about Nassau Coliseum, I don't know how you feel, Gil, but till the day I die, I think what they should have done with Nassau Coliseum is leveled it, updated it, and just had a new Nassau Coliseum. I don't understand what the hell the thinking was behind that. That's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I just don't understand how that didn't happen.
Yeah, there's a lot of political reasons for it that we could probably do a whole separate book on if either of one of us wanted to tackle that. You had the county, the state, and, everybody sort of disagreeing on it. But at the end of the day, I agree with you. And what they ended up doing, they made an arena that was too large for an AHL team and too small for an NHL team. And now it's going to be run by a casino. So it's in no man's land.
It made absolutely no sense. I went to one game at the UBS Arena, excuse me. And it's like a nice arena inside, but traveling there is a pain in the ass. The parking stinks. There's no more tailgating. I don't know what the thought process was behind that.
It's a very different atmosphere, and I definitely do miss the tailgating that was such a part of the culture at the Nassau Coliseum. So I am with you there. Well, Greg, we got a lot more to talk about. We're going to take a little break. We'll come back. We'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of some of the things that happened that season. I don't want to give away too much, but we'll be back with more with Greg Prato coming up on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by your friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. Islander fans, use your knowledge of the Islanders on FanDuel. Check out the odds for tonight's game in Vancouver. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Today's episode is also brought to you by SelectQuote, the World Series, the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup. The world's top athletes get to play in these top-level sporting events thanks to one thing, teamwork. And teamwork can also protect your financial legacy and your family's future. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents are the perfect teammates when shopping for customized, affordable life insurance. They can help you find the right policy to keep your financial legacy safely in your family's end zone. You invest so much time to take care of yourself and to be the healthiest, best version of you. SelectQuote's exclusive policies can reward that effort. Head to SelectQuote.com and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life and your budget. Other life insurance brokers offer impersonal one-size-fits-all policies that may cost you more and cover you less, but SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. Get the right life insurance for you for less at SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL. Go to SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL today to get started. That's SelectQuote.com/LockedOnNHL. We are back here with Greg Prato, the author of a new book, Hapless Islanders, which discusses the colorful first season of the New York Islanders' existence. And, one guy I definitely wanted to talk to you about, and he was voted the fan favorite that year, but ended up having a very tragic life later on, is Brian Spinner Spencer. And if you weren't around back in the day, you probably don't know who Brian Spencer was, but boy, did the fans take to him in an unbelievable way.
He did. He was, I think the best description of him was he was Gary Howitt before Gary Howitt, kind of, although Gary Howitt does join the Islanders later in that season, but he was a very hard-nosed, tough player. Just to show how hard-nosed and tough he was, I was looking at some of the, by doing this book, I had to go back and look at a lot of the stats, a lot of the box scores. He would, there were a few games, or at least one game where he fought Dave the Hammer Schultz twice. So that shows how fearless and also tough he was. But sadly, he had a horrible, tragic life. His father got shot and killed. It's a whole story that could be its own episode, but it's talked about in this book. And he eventually got, he had problems with drugs and alcohol, and just everything went wrong. And he had some good year. He had a good year with the Islanders, but just his off the ice type things, he just was too crazy, pretty much, is from what I could understand. There was a famous story of him bringing a gun into the locker room or to the practice rink, like very strange stuff that like you probably shouldn't be doing. And he didn't, I guess, think very clearly. But I even asked someone, is it possible that what we know now about head injuries, is it possible what he went through with all the CTE stuff, is it possible? And someone said, yeah, it's very possible that, back then they didn't have protocol in place. So someone like him,
they didn't have helmets.
Yeah, exactly. Very true. Yeah, and he sadly eventually dropped out of hockey. He got involved in a bad crowd in Florida, and he wound up getting shot and killed also at an early age. There's a made-for-TV movie. I forget the name of it right now, but it is on YouTube that you could find that tells his whole story. And I asked one of the people I interviewed for the book who knew him, I said, was that a faithful representation of his life? And he said, yes, it was. So you could watch that and make your own decision.
Now, the name of the book comes from a quote as well. And why don't you talk a little bit about why it's called Hapless Islanders?
Yes. What happened was the Islanders lost so much that first year that Newsday and the Times and all these papers that were covering the Islanders started referring to them as the Hapless Islanders. So much so that Bill Torrey even thought that was their name after a while, because every single article was the Hapless Islanders, the Hapless Islanders. So that when I was working on this book, that was really clearly going to be the title of this book. That just kind of sums up the whole entire first year. But to their credit, after that first year, that name just totally disappeared, because Al Arbour demanded that his team be better, and he quickly turned them around. I think that was probably the quickest turnaround from being such an awful team to such a great team. Again, similar to, I guess, the Mets with also Gil Hodges coming in.
Yeah.
It's similar to the Islanders with also the legendary Al Arbour coming in, who, Gil, I'm sure you probably agree with me, Al Arbour never gets the credit he deserves. He's up there with Bill Belichick, all of them, but for some reason, all we hear about is Bill Belichick, Joe Torre, all these guys who are great, are legends, but Al Arbour as great as both those guys, in my opinion.
Al Arbour was incredible. I was fortunate enough to interview him a couple of times, and in addition to being a really classy guy, he, the thing about Al Arbour and those great Islander teams, if you wanted to shut somebody down and win 2-1, they could do that. If you wanted to drop the gloves, like the Dave Schultz situations that you mentioned with Spinner Spencer, later with Clark Gillies, they could play it that way. If you wanted to run and gun and try to win 7-6, they could beat you that way. So he had the ability to just maximize the talent on that team and to win in a lot of different ways. And to me, one of the great stats about the early Islanders, after that first year where they played 78 games and won 12, in the second year, which was Al Arbour's first season as coach, they cut their goals against by 100 in that first season. And that's quite an accomplishment.
Yep, totally. I agree. I mean, Hopefully one day he gets the credit that he definitely deserves. I mean, people on Long Island, I think, recognize his greatness, but it's like a little kind of kept secret outside of Long Island or amongst Islander fans, the 19 consecutive playoff wins that no other pro sports team is ever going to even come close to that, I don't think.
Yeah, no, not going to happen anytime soon, especially with free agency and salary caps and all of that. Very, very hard to imagine a team being that consistently great for that long. One of the highlights of that first season, by far, this very unexpected upset win over the Boston Bruins. It was probably the biggest on-ice highlight that the team had. Talk to me a little bit about that game.
Sure. I believe the Islanders were coming off a multi-game losing streak, and they visited the Boston Bruins at Boston Garden. That one of the people I interviewed for the book said the two toughest arena. I think it was actually Lauren Henning said the two toughest arenas to play in at the time was Boston Gardens and also the Philadelphia Spectrum, were the two hardest as far as fans and also how good the teams were that they were playing there. And the Boston Bruins won the Stanley Cup the previous year, so that shows how great they were. But it meant a lot to Eddie Westfall, who was on the Islanders now, that the Bruins just pretty much tossed off. So obviously, if the Islanders were to beat the Bruins, that was going to be their Stanley Cup that year, pretty much. And they totally shocked them. They came out in the first period and were up 4-0 or possibly 5-0. I think it was 4-0. But then what happened is the Bruins suddenly woke up, and then it was like a shootout. That one team would score, the other team would score back. And then I think the final score was 9-7 due to a last-second empty net goal, I believe. But Billy Smith was in goal for the Islanders that year, too. And it's funny that I remember I once interviewed, I believe it was Eddie Westfall, and he said that first year you could kind of tell Billy Smith was good, but you really couldn't tell because they were so awful, and he was facing 50 shots a night. So, like when a goalie's under that type of pressure, you can't really make heads or tails if he really is a good goalie or not. But obviously, I think he's one of the greatest goalies ever.
Yeah, no, such a clutch goalie. I mean, the bigger the game, the better he played. And, anybody, and also you did not want to go into his crease.
Exactly. I was going to say something else that is very frustrating. I still watch the Islanders. I'm still a diehard Islander fan. And I'm sure this probably gets you go too, Gil, is when you watch the undisciplined play sometimes of the modern day Islanders, and you think back to what it was during the Al Arbour coach teams, you want to tear your hair out sometimes.
It is frustrating. It is frustrating because those teams, we took them for granted in a lot of ways. I mean, I was 13 when they won the first Stanley Cup.
Mm-hmm.
And, that was normal because they got good by 1975, their third season. This was a good team, and they went to the semifinals and the semifinals so many times before they finally reached the Stanley Cup final in 1980. Mm-hmm. You thought it was normal that every hockey team is this good for this long. And then after those guys started to get older and retired, I mean, what is it now? 41 years and counting, and we still haven't gotten another championship. So, looking back, you realize how difficult it was. But at the time, it was just like, oh, yeah, the Islanders, they just keep winning.
So also, if someone told you or I back in 1983, 84 that the Islanders were just going to dive off and the franchise and the ownership was just going to go down the toilet, you would have thought that there was no way that you would have believed that. You would have thought that they would be right back there in the next few years. But I guess just bad ownership over the years. The whole Nassau Coliseum fiasco, the whole John Spano thing, just one horrible thing after the other.
Yeah, it hasn't been an easy ride, but I'll tell you this. Islander fans are so loyal and so dedicated, and hopefully that dedication will be rewarded again in the near future. And Greg, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the book and a little bit more about, how they can get in touch with you if they want to and find more about your work?
Sure. The best places to find it are through the Amazon site. You could look up for this, Hapless Islanders, and also the other book I mentioned, Dynasty, which is a oral history. For this one, I interviewed Al Arbour, Bill Torrey, Clark Gillies, quite a few people that are sadly no longer with us. And this book, Stan Fischler called, I think, the greatest book, or at least one of the greatest Islanders books of all time, which to me, that's highest praise coming from Stan. You can find those both on Amazon. They're available at both of them paperback, hardcover, Kindle, and also audio narrated by me. So you hear my beautiful Long Island accent reading the whole thing to you.
It's authentic.
And also you can go to Twitter or X. I don't know what they call it now. X.com/Greg Prato Writer. I have info how to buy the books there. And also like I said, I write primarily about rock music. So I'm always posting articles, but also sites and things like that to links to my latest interviews and things like that.
Greg, I want to thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and definitely check out his books on the New York Islanders. It's a great read. I really enjoyed it and brought back a lot of memories for me.
Thanks, Gil. And also keep up the good work, because like I said, I enjoy listening to your podcast because it makes me feel like I'm not the only Islander fan out there.
Appreciate that, Greg. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. And Prize Picks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my picks hit, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. And, here's the great thing. You basically have to pick whether or not players will do better or worse than their Prize Pick projections. And it is super easy and fun. Just download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Don't forget, Prize Picks, run your game. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget now, for your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. You can become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Locked On Fantasy Hockey is on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So, Islanders, Canucks tonight, another tough opponent, a team that is just not easy to beat. Vancouver 8-3-3 on the season. Again, it's a 10 o'clock Eastern time start. I will be live tweeting during the game, so check that out as well. And again, tomorrow's show will not be premiering on YouTube until about half hour, 45 minutes after the game ends. But definitely look for it. If you're a night owl and you could stay up, great. If not, well, the podcast will be waiting for you, audio or video, as soon as you wake up. Right now, the Canucks, they are on a nice little streak. They have won 4 of their last 5. As I mentioned, 8-3-3 on the season. And they're doing it with defense, which is interesting because their number one goalie has been out. But Kevin Lankinen has been outstanding. He is 8-1-2, a 2.46 goals against, and a 9.11 save percentage. Right now, Vancouver's 7th in the league in goals against. They are only 20th in goals for, which is a little bit of a surprise. But when you're just playing as well as the Canucks have consistently over the first part of this season, it definitely makes a difference. Power play is kind of middle of the road. They're 14th in the league, 20.5% success. The penalty kill is better, 9th, 83.7%. So the Islanders certainly have to be wary of that. Brock Besser right now leads the team with 3 power play goals. Quinn Hughes leads them with 5 assists with the extra attacker. And Hughes right now has 13 assists on the season and 16 points. So again, some talented players here. Pius Suter tied with Brock Besser for the team lead in goals with 6. So JT Miller, Pius Suter, and Jonathan Lekarimaki, that's the top line. Elias Pettersson has been struggling a little bit. He centers the second line. Jake DeBrusk and Connor Garland on either side of him. Teddy Bluger, Danton Heinen, and Kiefer Sherwood on the third line. And then former Islander Atu Ratu centers the fourth line with Niels Hoglander and Arshdeep Baines on either side of him. Philip Roenick and Quinn Hughes are the top defense pair. Tyler Myers and Carson Soucy are the second pair. And Eric Brandstrom and Vincent Desharnais are the third pair. Again, the goalies, Lankinen and Arturs Silovs. Lankinen has been great. Silovs struggling. Besser now day-to-day. Thatcher Demko, the number one goalie before the season, is on IR, as is Dakota Joshua. And Derek Forbore is out right now with an injury. We'll see if he is able to return. This is a tough assignment. Vancouver is one of the better teams in the league. Yeah, right now they're in third place in the Pacific Division, but they're 2 points out of first. They have 3 games in hand over the Kings and 1 game in hand over Vegas. So, they are right there, and I expect them to remain right there throughout most of this season. You get the feeling this team is really, really good and that they still haven't played their best hockey. So it'll be a challenge for the Islanders. Let's see if they're equal to it again. You're going to need some great goaltending, whether it's Semyon Varlamov or Ilya Sorokin. You're going to need to minimize those penalties and minimize those mistakes in your own zone. If you can't do that, this could be a very, very long game for the New York Islanders. If they can get the kind of goaltending and demonstrate the same kind of stick-to-itness as they did the other night against, against the Oilers, they have a chance, but they probably have to be even better against Vancouver. Edmonton may have the higher ranked, elite players, but I think Vancouver has more depth. So we'll see how that all ends up playing out, but should be a good game. Looking forward to it and hoping the Islanders can manage at least a point. Remember, 5-game road trip. We want 5 points. We have 1 in 1 game. Let's see if they can add to that total tonight. Time now for our Islanders birthday of the day. And I know I didn't have a chance because of our guests to give you a clue, but the clue, well, it's a center who was drafted by the LA Kings, but became an Islander in his second NHL season and stayed with the team just during the 1999-2000 season before being dealt to Edmonton. Later played for the Rangers and the Capitals and the Flames and the Canucks and the Ducks. Let's just say this guy got around. And I'm talking about Josh Green. Green, 6'3", 215, a second-round pick of the Kings in 1996. 49 games for the Islanders in 1999-2000, 12 goals, 26 points, 41 penalty minutes. For his NHL career, 341 games, 36 goals, 76 points, 206 penalty minutes. Add 1 assist in 17 NHL playoff games, none with the Islanders. And even recently, he was a coach in both the WHL juniors and in the AHL as recently as 2022, 2023. So Josh Green hung around a bit. One of his better games as an Islander, November 10th, 1999, Islanders visiting the Carolina Hurricanes. Felix Potvin, the goalie for the Islanders. Arturs Irbe, the goalie for Carolina. And our Islanders' birthday of the day got the scoring started, but not until late in the game, late in the third period. It's scoreless, and Josh Green scores his first goal as an Islander. Olli Jokinen and Jorgen Janssen with the assists at 14-18. Marius Cherkovsky adds a later goal, and the Islanders go on to win 2-0. 25 saves for Felix Potvin. But for our Islanders' birthday of the day, Josh Green, he had a goal on 2 shots. He had the game-winning goal, and he was a +1 while skating 16 minutes and 42 seconds of ice time. So we will be back tomorrow. We will talk a little bit more about our key takeaways from this particular game. and we will preview Saturday's game in Seattle. So make sure that you join us for that. Remember, that's a 4 o'clock Eastern time start on Saturday. So again, we'll preview that game for you. Thanks again for making Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Again, we're back tomorrow with our key takeaways from tonight's game, preview Saturday's game. If you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future show, email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. If you leave your first name and where you're from, we're happy to mention you on the show when we discuss whatever's on your mind. You can also follow the podcast on X at Locked On Isles. And you can follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR, VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long, and I'm live tweeting during nearly every Islanders home and road game. Have a great night, everybody. Stay safe, and of course, let's go Islanders.